所以，来吧，贝下龙，在平安中，阿泰来，戴上王冠，巴拉，他的新郎，波伊卡拉，来吧，新娘。这是一首优美的希伯来婚礼歌曲，仿佛天上的天使在呼唤等待了6000年的新娘，勇敢地站出来，为将要来临的天上君王戴上荣耀的冠冕。
Yu Menglong, Joseph, 9. A tribute to Yu Menglong's mother and to mothers living under a tyrannical regime. In the spiritual realm, it has become crystal clear, Yu's mother was long ago taken home by God. This reality evokes feelings that are simultaneously deeply sorrowful and profoundly comforting. The sorrow lies in the fact that, upon this earth, a mother was denied the right to know the truth or to view her son's remains. Instead, she was deceived by a fraudulent urn containing ashes. This land, steeped in such wickedness, truly deserves divine retribution. However, once you have finished reading this post and learned of the fates suffered by thousands of mothers in Yan'an, you will realize that when that day of reckoning finally arrives, no matter how horrific the ensuing calamity may be, it will be nothing less than deserved. The source of comfort, conversely, is this: God could not bear to witness her enduring such grief. Thus, He spared her from having to suffer through the many sorrowful years that lay ahead, particularly those years intertwined with the great catastrophes that were soon to unfold. Instead, He allowed her spirit to stand guard over her son's spirit, remaining by his side until, 2 years hence, we succeed in liberating them both from the darkness. Consider this: only today did Auntie reveal on YouTube the shocking details regarding the total blood exchange procedure. Yet, in 2 of our previous posts, we had already discussed the practice of transfusing the blood of the young into the bodies of the elderly. Had Yu's mother ever learned that every drop of blood in her son's body had been drained away, would she not have fainted from shock time and again? Indeed, regarding both Yu Menglong's death and the harrowing 11 years of suffering he endured, nearly every single truth is of a nature that would drive a human being to the brink of madness. For blood is the very essence of the human soul, thus, those who caused their blood to be infused into Yu Menglong shall surely face the most severe and inexorable divine retribution. At this very moment, the spirits of both mother and son are under the personal guardianship of Uriel the archangel, who holds dominion over both the human realm and the underworld. Therefore, let your hearts be at ease. Ultimately, both mother and son shall return to the Ark in the year 2028. Though we may not recognize them by their earthly identities, knowing them only as a mother and son, the veils concealing the true identities of all shall finally be lifted during the Feast of Tabernacles in 2031. At that time, Yu Menglong, who shall henceforth be known as Yu Menglong once more, rather than Joseph, will lead the 153,600 fish of the house of Adam back to their father's home, where they shall dwell eternally within the kingdom of God. Furthermore, the multitude of angels from the celestial realm have now all descended to dwell among humanity. Many have long since assumed human form to walk among us, yet, the vast majority remain in realms invisible to our eyes, standing guard over those individuals who bear the mark of life upon their foreheads. Only if an individual chooses death of their own free will their guardian angel depart from their side. And now, the angels who once governed both the human realm and the underworld are standing guard in the darkness, protecting the spirits of the righteous. Yu Menglong and his mother's spirits are both there is no need for anyone to worry. Someone recently leaked information to Moyang Kandian, attempting to deceive us by presenting a few family photos from Yu Menglong's childhood. They claimed to be an acquaintance of the Yu family, but in reality, they are an agent of the Chinese public security apparatus sent to muddy the waters. These photos serve only to confirm that the authorities did indeed raid the Yu family home. They are using images seized during that raid to achieve ulterior motives. Everyone must remain vigilant and cautious. God could not bear to witness Yu's mother in such profound grief, and so He called her home long ago. As for Yu Menglong's younger sister, she will ultimately be the one within the sanctuary of the Ark to expose the crimes of the Chinese Communist Party. Yu Menglong's mother played a pivotal role in his upbringing. She was a music teacher who worked various odd jobs to support the family. She not only raised him but also nurtured his natural talent for singing. "He is the child I raised by working odd jobs." This single sentence has left netizens heartbroken. Indeed, he was a mother's precious treasure, yet in the hands of his captors, he was treated with utter disregard. Behind every tragedy lies the collapse of a family, not merely a statistic. Consider the hundreds of Tiananmen mothers, the thousands of Yan'an mothers, and the millions of people who go missing, are brutalized, or have their organs harvested while still alive every year in the present day, and the mothers they left behind. The same applies to the tens of millions who starved to death in the past, the nearly 10 million who perished in political purges, and the hundreds of millions of lives lost due to the one-child policy. In this post, we will examine the Yan'an mothers, a distinct group, to shed light on the systemic, dehumanizing crimes perpetrated by the regime. In truth, such atrocities have been commonplace since the Yan'an era. Therefore, do not be surprised to hear of a Public Security Bureau chief aiding and abetting rape and murder, nor should you find the practice of forced organ harvesting to be a novelty. If you do, it simply reveals your own naivete. The ultimate lesson here is that we must thoroughly eradicate that evil party and that criminal regime rather than merely opposing the individual figure of Xi Jinping, for as long as the system remains intact, it will inevitably spawn successors even more wicked than he. Look at Yu Menglong's mother, then look at the Yan'an mothers. From these examples, we can see that the rampant lawlessness witnessed across the nation today is, in fact, an inevitable outcome. Furthermore, the great catastrophe that looms ahead is nothing less than a self-inflicted retribution upon these perpetrators, a karmic reckoning from which there is no escape. Let us begin with Yu's mother. According to information available online, Yu's father passed away when the boy was just 5 years old, a circumstance that bears a striking resemblance to the early life of Jesus. Thus, having grown up alongside his mother since the age of 5, he became the one who relied upon her most deeply, yet simultaneously the one most inclined to shoulder her burdens. This explains why he is unwilling to let his fans worry about him, and even more so, why he refuses to let his mother worry. And this very point became the leverage that this group of devils used to control him. God orchestrated the early departure of his father just as he did with the earthly father of Jesus, specifically to cultivate within them the masculine qualities required to shoulder responsibility. Joseph's fate was even more tragic, as he was sold into slavery at the age of 17. Jacob, on the other hand, grew closer to his mother, Rebekah, for Isaac and Abraham had favored Esau over Jacob, and Rebekah, a spiritual counterpart to Abraham, profoundly reshaped Jacob's character. Joseph, Jacob, and Jesus were all destined to engage in spiritual warfare. Yu Menglong is no exception, and thus he, too, had to learn the meaning of true responsibility. Isaac, conversely, was required to embody the virtue of obedience, hence, he lived in the same tent as his mother for 37 years. In that era, when children were considered adults by age 7 or 8, and marriages often took place by age 10, Isaac remained in the tent of his obedient mother, Sarah, even at the age of 37. In truth, this was a spiritual training ground designed to teach him absolute obedience, enabling him to fulfill God's specific mission. It is worth noting here that, within the spiritual lineage connecting Yu Menglong to Joseph, the next significant milestone involves the sacrifice of 30 plus 77. Just as Jesus ascended to the cross 70 times 7 days after the age of 30, Isaac and Yu Menglong were both called to offer a sacrifice at the age of 37. In Isaac's case, the sacrifice was offered to God, and Isaac was spared. In Yu Menglong's case, at the age of 37, he surrendered himself to the torment of the devils, ultimately securing the condemnation of Satan and his entire lineage. Furthermore, the year Abraham offered his sacrifice marked his 137th year of life. This reveals to us that, within the cosmic order of heaven and earth, the ultimate form of sacrifice is the one offered by Yu Menglong at age 37, offering his own flesh, organs, and blood to nail Satan and his entire family to the depths of hell, a spiritual victory that is now unfolding in the physical realm of human experience. Returning to these devout figures, we are taught that character traits are neither inherently good nor bad, rather, in the hands of God, they are all specifically designed and honed to fulfill His unique divine missions. Consider Enoch, for instance. Anyone who dared to harm his children would find him fighting them to the death. This was, in essence, a form of spiritual training, a preparation for the truth that should anyone dare to harm the least among those within the ark, the entire ark, the collective body of believers, would rise up to fight them to the very end. Even if the ark were to be utterly destroyed, that would be God's concern, but to lose even the smallest soul, that would be the responsibility of Enoch and the ark itself. The anguish of losing a child dates back to the time of Father Adam and his wife. It is a sorrow born of experiencing the consequences of one's own sin. Yet Abraham's wife, Sarah, a woman of deep piety, also endured 3 days and 3 nights of such anguish, believing she had lost her son. Subsequently, upon discovering that her son was safe, she was overcome with ecstatic joy. This sudden swing from profound grief to overwhelming elation ultimately cost Sarah her life. The details can be found in the book of Jasher. I encourage you all to read it and see how Satan, by speaking nothing but the absolute truth, ultimately brought about Sarah's demise. The truth, when spoken at the wrong moment, can be far more lethal than a sharpened sword. Sarah, despite being a woman of piety, ultimately perished because she could not let go of her attachment to Isaac. Yet, as human beings living in this world, many things remain veiled from our spiritual sight. Even the giants of faith such as Abraham wept bitter tears as he prepared to sacrifice his 37-year-old son, Isaac, upon the altar. He proceeded nonetheless, simply because he believed that God would fulfill the promises He had made to him through that very son. As for how God would fulfill those promises, that was beyond his human comprehension, and so he did not question it, but simply set out to execute God's command. Ultimately, God credited that very faith to him as righteousness. The same holds true for Father Jacob. When he believed he had lost his most beloved son, the very son he knew was destined to save his family, he was utterly bereft. He could not fathom how God could possibly save his entire household once that son was gone. All he felt he could do was hasten the marriage and procreation of his younger brother, Benjamin. He believed that this alone could somehow compensate for the loss of Joseph. It was not until 22 years later, when he was finally reunited with Joseph, that he truly placed his faith in God. We, the 10,000 kings, must also undergo our own trials and defining moments. At this juncture, our faith is indeed no larger than a mustard seed, yet 2 years from now, even the humblest among us, the least of the brethren, will possess a faith capable of moving mountains. For within the ark, we shall come to a profound and complete understanding of the workings of the Spirit and, more importantly, we shall realize that God the Father transcends the Spirit entirely. This, indeed, is the very reason why we must endure these present sufferings. And as for the women of the 10,000 kings' household, their sole duty is to learn to submit to their husbands. Consequently, the women of the house of the King of Kings tend to enjoy relatively good fortune, spared from the need for excessive suffering to temper their spirits. Yet, for a mother like Mrs. Yu, the anguish of losing a son is a heart-wrenching ordeal. From Eve to Sarai, from the many wives of King David to Yu Menglong's mother today, all stand as poignant examples of such soul-shattering grief. When Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice, Isaac was 37 years old, precisely the same age at which Yu Menglong passed away. This is no mere coincidence, but rather a divine arrangement. According to God's teachings to the people of Israel, a man reaches intellectual maturity at the age of 30, becoming capable of serving as a teacher and mentor to others. By adding another 7 years to that span, one can assert without any room for dispute that any decision made by such a man is the product of deep, deliberate contemplation, rather than a mere impulsive whim. Thus, the moment Abraham offered Isaac marked a pivotal juncture where both men simultaneously passed a monumental test of faith. Abraham fulfilled God's will through his obedience to the divine command, while Isaac fulfilled it through his obedience to his father's command. This embodies the essence of what Confucius termed fathers acting as fathers, and sons acting as sons. A father must conduct himself with the dignity befitting a father, just as a son must conduct himself with the propriety befitting a son. These prescribed roles are, in truth, derived from the commandments ordained by God. Confucius, however, was unaware of the commandments themselves. Instead, he observed the residual norms of conduct between fathers and sons, norms that had been preserved within the framework of ritual propriety after having been cultivated by divine influence. It was for this reason that he sought to restore the social order, specifically the proper relationships between rulers and subjects, and between fathers and sons, by reviving the ancient rites of Zhou. We shall have the opportunity to delve into these matters in greater detail in the future. For now, let this brief mention suffice. Many men begin working to support their families at a very early age. Indeed, Yu Menglong grew up in just such a household, where he emerged as the family's steadfast pillar of strength. This explains why he was a man of such profound responsibility and unwavering commitment. The vast majority of firstborn sons undergo a rigorous training within their homes to cultivate this sense of responsibility, a discipline of paramount importance for any man, particularly for one destined to shoulder a mission of such magnitude. Consequently, the circumstances of their lives are often divinely orchestrated to facilitate precisely this kind of training. This also explains why he silently endured 11 years of hardship entirely on his own, never once willing to reveal the extent of his suffering to his family, for he could not bear to cause his mother any anxiety. And this, too, is why when his mother finally learned that a tragedy had befallen her son, she collapsed in a faint on the spot. Such is the nature of all things that originate from God. Enoch recalls that when he was searching for his own life partner, the most critical criterion was the ability to endure hardship. Anyone incapable of enduring adversity was simply not considered. Later, when Enoch's parents visited their daughter-in-law's hometown and witnessed the sheer austerity and arduousness of life there, they finally understood with heartbreaking clarity the true extent of the hardships their own son had been compelled to endure. Now, as Enoch watches his son undergo trials and solitude, he recognizes this as a blessing from God. For anyone destined to become an instrument in God's hands, he will surely sculpt and refine them. In truth, God takes no pleasure in tormenting people unnecessarily. Consider, for instance, other members of Enoch's family. They were not required to endure such hardships. From a young age, whenever they encountered difficult conditions, they simply walked away, yet, in the end, they too successfully fulfilled the missions God had assigned them. This illustrates a crucial point: we must personally discern our own mission and then voluntarily seek out the necessary hardships. This is what pleases God, and it serves to spare us from many other sufferings that might otherwise be forcibly imposed upon us. Years ago, an elderly professor visiting from China accompanied Enoch to haul fertilizer-rich soil. Upon seeing the work, he remarked, "This is exactly the kind of labor we were forced to do back in the cow sheds during the Cultural Revolution." He simply could not comprehend why a wealthy professor living abroad would willingly choose to endure such physical toil. Members of Enoch's own family echoed this sentiment, saying, "If any of us had tried to force you to do this work, you would have verbally torn us apart." Indeed, the labor performed in the cow sheds was compulsory. Any suffering inflicted by others was endured under duress. However, the suffering one voluntarily seeks out is a matter of free will undertaken with a willing and cheerful heart. When Yu Menglong, Joseph, descended from the heavens, he chose to take on this specific role. Therefore, let no one fall into the trap of idle speculation, wondering, why didn't he simply run away? The same applies to his mother. She, too, was part of this divine arrangement. Yet, once a soul enters this world, a veil descends, obscuring all memory of their heavenly origins. Many people live their entire lives right up to their dying breath without ever realizing who they truly are. Nevertheless, so long as one follows the dictates of one's conscience and faithfully walks the path laid out before them, one is bound to fulfill God's mission. Although, from our current perspective, the fate of martyrs may appear more tragic than our own, who can say what truly awaits us in the end? This process of spiritual training also serves to explain why Yu Menglong possesses such remarkable self-discipline and capacity for self-reflection. Those who hail from the heavens instinctively know how to prepare themselves for their earthly tasks, a knowledge undoubtedly fostered and reinforced by his mother. The parallels with Enoch's own mother are striking. She was called home to God at the age of 77. During her final days in the hospital, the number 7 appeared everywhere: Ward 7, Building 7, the 7th floor, Bed 7. By the end, even the nurses were astonished at how inextricably linked this elderly woman seemed to be with the number 7. It was not until the prophecies of the Ji'e'akam Urok, the records of Ji'e'akam, were unveiled revealing her true identity and station in the heavens that the full significance of these signs became clear. By sharing Enoch's story, I wish to convey to you all that the circumstances surrounding Yu Menglong's mother were orchestrated in precisely the same manner. She was no ordinary mortal, but rather an angel who had descended from the heavens. This is why God did not allow her to linger in prolonged suffering or sorrow. Instead, he reached down and called her directly home to his side. From a spiritual perspective, the vast majority of the elders in the house of the King of Kings, specifically the women, will choose to be reincarnated as children born into devout families, thereby entering heaven. The men, however, being the heads of their households, must face their challenges while still in the flesh. Consequently, many of these elders will descend to the underworld to reunite with Yu Menglong. 2 years later, they will assume new bodies and return to the Ark to complete the remaining 3.5-year journey. Only after achieving perfect unity of heart and spirit with everyone else aboard the Ark will they ultimately be able to enter the Garden of Eden. Yu Menglong's mother, however, declined to be reincarnated, choosing instead to remain with Yu Menglong's spirit. Although Yu Menglong's spirit currently resides temporarily in the deepest darkness of the underworld, Uriel, the archangel who governs the realm of the dead, is personally watching over him. It is well understood that once the house of Adam returns to the celestial realm to become God's most favored children, Joseph as the patriarch of the house of Adam will occupy a position of immense honor. Thus, the archangels would never dare to show even the slightest negligence in their duties. Moreover, everyone holds Yu Menglong in high esteem, for the trials he has endured constitute his greatest glory. During his lifetime as Joseph, Yu Menglong endured 11 years of suffering, to which another 2 years were subsequently added. Although God utilized those final 2 years to teach Joseph not to seek help from men, but rather to look solely to God, these 2 years were nonetheless an experience Yu Menglong was ultimately destined to undergo. In this end age, this period corresponds precisely to the 2 years spent waiting in the darkness of the underworld. This pattern was also clearly demonstrated during Joseph's own generation. The house of Israel spent 430 years in Egypt, yet they endured active suffering for only 86 of those years. The ratio 86 divided by 430 equals 1/5. This corresponds to the period during which the Egyptians submerged Joseph's coffin at the bottom of the Nile, a duration constituting exactly 1/5 of the total 430 years, or 86 years. Similarly, the 2 years added to Joseph's initial 11 years of suffering represent a proportional arrangement of exactly 1/5. This serves to remind us that God's divine plan is executed with absolute precision, down to the very last detail. These 2+ years are a trial that Joseph and those with him must simply endure and see through to the end. Of course, no one should imagine the underworld to be a place of unmitigated horror. While the wicked are indeed destined to experience the terrifying torments of purgatory, the devout are treated with the utmost care and protection, for God Himself is the sovereign Lord of the underworld. Moreover, the profound darkness of hell is reserved for those who sever their connection with God. When a person is connected to God, they have absolutely no need for telephones, televisions, or mobile phones, for through their spirit alone, they can perceive all manner of events occurring throughout the heavens and the earth. Therefore, the fact that God the Father has taken Mother Yu home is, in truth, a blessing, for she need no longer suffer or endure hardship in this sinful world, but may instead join the spirits of the righteous watching over the events unfolding on earth and interceding in prayer for our spiritual battles. Joseph's mother, Rachel, was also taken home prematurely. She died in childbirth at the age of 45, while giving birth to Joseph's younger brother. Had this not happened, one can only imagine the depths of grief and devastation Rachel would have suffered upon hearing the news that Joseph was lost to her. However, in this instance, Mother Yu does not mirror Rachel, but rather Rachel's handmaiden, Bilhah. A handmaiden is ultimately destined to accompany her mistress. She must undergo the very same trials and experiences as her mistress in order to truly comprehend her mistress's heart and mind. Even though Rachel had departed this world prematurely, on the very day Joseph was sold into slavery, weeping inconsolably until the world itself seemed to grow dim, he inexplicably found himself standing before his mother's tomb. Joseph's grief intensified even further, until Rachel's voice rose from beneath the earth, bidding him to find peace and submit to God's divine plan. For Rachel, from her vantage point, could perceive the benevolent purpose behind God's actions. Yet, despite this insight, Rachel herself wept with profound sorrow. Whenever a righteous soul departs this world, whether ascending to the heavens or descending into the earth, their spirit immediately establishes a direct connection with God. It is only while dwelling in the mortal realm that the spirit remains veiled or closed off. Thus, whether it be Abraham, Jacob, or any one of us living today, we must all ultimately embark upon and complete that upward journey of coming to know God, for God has declared, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Genesis 6:3, Chinese Union Version. It was from that very moment that God distinguished between humanity's conscious mind and its subconscious mind. The conscious mind was left to human discretion, allowing individuals to make their own decisions, while the subconscious mind remained firmly within God's grasp. Consequently, so long as a person follows the dictates of their own conscience, they will not go astray. This is precisely what Yu Menglong meant when he observed that human beings possess a remarkable capacity for self-salvation. One must recognize that for a 37-year-old individual, many of whom are still struggling merely to survive, it is often exceedingly difficult to embrace religious faith or place their trust in God. If one follows the dictates of one's own conscience, God will recognize that person and ultimately save them. This is the source of Yu Menglong's capacity for self-salvation. And when we return to the Garden of Eden, our minds will connect directly with the Spirit of God, much like all modern computers currently link up with a central AI hub, enabling us to access knowledge about anything we desire. Of course, before fulfilling God's mission, angels invariably partake of the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Once consumed, they instantly understand exactly how to carry out their assigned tasks. These details are recorded in the first book of Enoch. I recently consulted an online version of the first book of Enoch, only to discover that the names of the archangels who govern the human realm and the underworld are missing. Malevolent forces are actively tampering with these texts, so I urge everyone to exercise caution. Remember this: the devil does not merely hold sway over China, the entire world lies under its dominion. We currently reside within the belly of the serpent, therefore, the various forms of suppression and bizarre occurrences we witness should come as no surprise. On the contrary, they serve as proof that you are doing what is right and that they are afraid. Ultimately, only after we have achieved our 10 victories will the serpent's belly finally burst open. It is then under the leadership of a figure akin to Moses that we shall break through the river of the serpent's belly to bring our mission to its full completion. Thus, Yu Menglong serves merely as a trailblazer, the vanguard signaling the commencement of this Red River campaign. Now, let us turn our attention to the Yan'an mothers. Once you truly understand the plight of these mothers, you will harbor no further illusions regarding the political system that victimized them. This, too, is the reason God has allowed Xi Jinping to cling to life, specifically so that he may lead that wicked party straight into the depths of hell. Back when Enoch was in search of the truth, he was deeply moved by the Tiananmen mothers, women whose children had perished in the Tiananmen Square massacre, many of whom never even had their bodies recovered. Yet, one day, while conversing with an elderly scholar, he suggested that I investigate the Yan'an mothers instead, for that group was far larger in number, and their story infinitely more terrifying and horrific. In those days, Yan'an was a place that progressive-minded youths yearned to reach, yet, how could they have known that it was, in reality, a hellscape of unspeakable horror? The large-scale production of opium there was, in fact, the least of their concerns. The most terrifying reality of all was the systematic, institutionalized slaughter of human beings. In those days, one could not simply waltz into Yan'an on a whim, one required a guide to lead the way. And once ushered inside, one became nothing more than a piece of meat upon the butcher's block, utterly at the mercy of one's captors, awaiting the inevitable slaughter. The first hurdle was the political vetting process, ostensibly a screening for enemy spies, but in reality, a license to kill at will. If an official simply took a dislike to someone, they would inflict whatever torture they pleased, rape, disembowelment, indeed, nothing you could possibly imagine is as horrific as the atrocities they actually committed, much like the murderous maniacs who killed Yu Menglong. The atmosphere in Yan'an was so terrifying that even Zhang Qiutao dared not attempt an escape. Knowing full well the horrors that lay beneath the surface, he had to wait for the perfect opportunity to flee the region. It was only during an official excursion between Yan'an and Xi'an that he finally mustered the courage to make his break. Ultimately, however, Zhou intercepted Zhang and presented him with two choices: either renounce his party membership or return obediently with him. Zhang chose to renounce his membership. Had he chosen to return, his fate would undoubtedly have been even more tragic than Wang Ming's, and he would never have had another chance to escape. The CCP's inhuman cruelty was not reserved merely for inconsequential students who had flocked to Yan'an, it extended just as ruthlessly to their own colleagues. Lin Biao met his end in a plane crash, Zhou and Kong Sheng were effectively killed by their doctors, and even Zhu De, the CCP's living bodhisattva, who posed absolutely no threat to Mao's power, was ultimately killed by death. Then there were the many who met their end in accidents, such as Mao's sister-in-law, He Yi. Even Mao's own son, the egg-fried rice boy, fell victim to a plot orchestrated by Kong Sheng and Zhang Qing, who used others as instruments of murder. As for the son He Zichen had borne, the one who was eventually located, Mao ultimately dared not acknowledge him. To do so would have meant a swifter death. By the time Mao had molded the CCP's internal intelligence apparatus into a system that struck terror into everyone's hearts, he himself had become terrified of it, to say nothing of the countless party members who had perished unjustly. Thus, among those who vanished in Yan'an were likely hundreds of thousands of young students. The vast majority of their parents never learned what became of their children, largely due to the chaos and upheaval of the wartime era. However, for tens of thousands of families, their children had managed to leave behind evidence notes or letters indicating that they were heading to Yan'an. Yet, even after the liberation, there was no sign of them, neither living person nor dead body. Consequently, in the post-liberation years, these families began making annual pilgrimages to Yan'an, hoping against hope for a miracle to discover their children's whereabouts and finally find some closure. Over the years, they banded together, and eventually, thousands of mothers coalesced into a collective known as the Mothers of Yan'an, a movement that was only forcibly brought to an end with the onset of the Cultural Revolution. You must understand that these women were once people of high standing and dignity. Eventually, they gathered together, supporting one another, and traveled to Yan'an every year, becoming known as the Mothers of Yan'an in search of the whereabouts of their children. They knew full well that their children had likely met a terrible end, yet, no matter how grim the outcome, they felt that simply finding their children's remains would offer some measure of solace. Decades passed, however, and their search yielded absolutely nothing. After the Cultural Revolution began, it became impossible for them to make the journey. Nevertheless, many of these elderly women held fast to their quest until their very last breath, passing away with their hearts still heavy with unavenged grief. Ultimately, God will reveal the truth to these souls, letting them know exactly what became of their children. If you find the story of the Mothers of Yan'an hard to believe, then look instead at the groups of mothers searching for their abducted children. The situations are strikingly similar. Nowadays, countless other groups of suffering mothers have emerged, those whose children were subjected to electroshock therapy in re-education camps, those whose loved ones were victims of forced organ harvesting, and so on. It is, quite simply, a living hell on earth. Should any one of these calamities befall a family, that family is utterly destroyed. Many people feel a sense of smug relief, congratulating themselves on having avoided such misfortunes. They believe they are lucky and therefore see no need to concern themselves with the plight of Yu Menglong. Yet, such indifference serves as a direct invitation extended with your own hands for God's retribution, compelling you to experience that very same suffering firsthand. Bear in mind that during the initial wave of the Great Tribulation, 1/4 of the world's population is destined to perish. Ask yourself, then, is it truly realistic to assume that your good luck will hold out? Of course, one's destiny is ultimately a matter of personal choice. When you rise up to speak out on behalf of Yu Menglong, heaven will spare you from having to endure similar suffering, for you will no longer require such hardships as a lesson. Therefore, if you wish to avoid the agony endured by Yu Menglong's mother, by the Mothers of Yan'an, or by the victims of the Cultural Revolution, then do your part to help dismantle this evil regime. Do not be so foolish as to invite heaven's judgment upon yourself by stepping into the very same abyss of suffering, for the tribulations of these end times will be many times more brutal than those of any era that has come before. Finally, a word of caution to everyone: we are engaged in a spiritual war against an entire demonic system. Consequently, even the online petitioning process itself is beset by strange and inexplicable anomalies. Do not assume that simply because we reside overseas, we are beyond the reach of the devil's tentacles. They have long since extended into every facet of our lives. Although these dark forces may squabble amongst themselves, they remain united in their efforts to suppress any movement demanding justice for Yu Menglong. Therefore, be prepared to encounter unprecedented levels of obstruction and suppression as you sign this petition. If you type in Chinese, have you recently noticed a change? In the past, simply typing YML would immediately bring up Yu Menglong's name as the first suggestion, yet now, suddenly, you can no longer find it at all. This is because they have filtered Yu Menglong's name as a sensitive keyword at the system input level, and this is happening overseas, within a foreign-based system. The battle has already begun. It is just that the first wave of mass fatalities, the Great Death, has yet to reveal when it will strike. Finally, let's listen to a song. Thank you all for tuning in to the Enoch channel.
听见淮阳声传的苦也成为欢乐，看着儿女一天天长大，有时也淘气，再苦累也满心喜慰。可狂风突然吹走我们的快乐，在心中狠狠加上的一刀，这交织成千万个悲痛，却让我们更加坚强。当欢笑与泪水交织成一曲旋律，我们用心去编织那份不变的爱。即使命运多舛，也看见天上的爱，因为我们知道爱是永